So the topic today, does God exist? Some people say no, because they believe that science has disproven the existence of God. So I'm Aaron Hughes, and I'm here today with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Rob Carter. I feel privileged to have a friend like Rob because not only is he a marine biologist, but he's an apologist and he's really biblically grounded. So I'm going to fire some questions at you today.
All right, bring it on. I'm ready for it.
All right. So we're called as Christians to share our faith.
Yes.
So we go out into the public realm and we share our faith in Jesus with the people around us, but sometimes we get some pushback. Okay.
Yes.
So sometimes we're going to have people that even might be a little angry when they hear the name Jesus, and they might ask you a question like, if God exists, what evidence can you show me that proves that? Does science actually prove the existence of God?
There are so many different directions you can go with that question. It's actually hard to know where to start.
Mm.
You can go philosophy. Say, what do you mean proof? There's no proof in anything. Science can't prove anything.
Like if you were looking for something, what would you expect to find?
Yeah, and then in other directions, what would you expect the evidence for God to be?
Right.
Let's see. How about life? You know,
Right.
things that are not predictable by scientific processes like intelligence or the human mind, like photosynthesis, super complex.
Or even the cell structure.
Yes.
So back in Darwin's day, he would think that the cell structure was just an unordered mass. But we know now when we look at it that it's hugely complex.
Back in Charles Darwin's day, in the middle 1800s, people thought the cell was a bag of salt.
Right.
They called it protoplasm, which even has an evolutionary connotation there. Today we call it cytoplasm, a little different. But if it's just salt, you can imagine it can change. It can become a square, it can turn purple, grow a spike, whatever. But as we drill down into the inner workings of the cell, it is nothing but shocking how complex a cell is.
So would that be a scientific evidence for the existence of God, or how could that be an evidence?
If life were really simple, evolution might be possible. The more complex life is, the harder it is for evolution to explain it.
Right.
And life is nothing but hyper complex.
Well, why don't you explain what evolution is? So maybe somebody that I'm talking to doesn't even have a proper understanding of evolution, because I've heard a lot of people say that evolution is science, but if the scientific method is that it has to be repeatable and testable.
Yeah, and you got to be able to see it.
Right. So
Yeah.
how does that come into play, like in a discussion with somebody?
Well, again, philosophy. People throw out all this stuff at you without realizing that behind all the words, there's a whole lot of background. So what direction you want the conversation to go? Evolution is a philosophy of history.
So it's not really
It's not hard science. Yeah, it's not empirical. It's not hard science. It's not something we can see today. It's an idea, a concept.
Hmm.
But when we test it, it fails consistently again and again. We call those evolution's Achilles heels
okay.
in that book and DVD that we produced several years ago.
So real science can show that there is a designer or a creator through the complexity of the cell.
Yeah, you can't use the word prove, which a lot of
Okay.
people do, and you just didn't use it, which is great. Science can support the idea, it can back up the idea, it can point you in a direction, and all the arrows are pointing toward creation and toward a creator and away from Darwin's ideas, which were 200 years old. They
Sure.
haven't held up to modern technology.
All right. So I understand what you're saying, Rob, but I wasn't always a Christian, wasn't always a creationist. So from an evolutionary standpoint, I'd be like, there's tons of evidence for evolution. How about the similarity between ape and human DNA? How about the fossil record? How about transitional fossils? And even looking at the cell, I would say from an evolutionary standpoint that could be explained by evolution as well.
When I was younger, I was also an evolutionist. I was also persuaded by what I thought the evidence was. But as I grew and explored for myself, I saw that what I thought was evidence really wasn't very sound, wasn't very strong.
Mm.
So you just brought up a whole lot of things at once. Fossil
Right.
records, similarity to humans and chimpanzees, cellular stuff. I mean, which one you want to go to first is a question. A lot of times when we're in a conversation with people, they just throw a million things at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, whoa, hold it, stop. Which one do you want to talk to is a great thing to ask somebody.
So it goes back to if you really did want to investigate if God existed, so if you truly are asking this question,
Yeah.
what would be the evidence that you would accept? Maybe.
Excellent. excellent way to go.
Yep.
And they'll say, explain the fossil record to me.
Right.
It looks like evolution. You had simple things early, and then you evolve into other things. You have dinosaurs, and then you have mammals, and then finally you have monkeys, and then people.
Right.
But that's not the way it works. There are, throughout the entire fossil record, what we call living fossils. Things that appear really early, if you would, in the evolutionary model, and yet they're exactly the same today, with no evidence of evolution. That is across the entire tree of life. In case after case after case, something appears and is exactly the same today. Where's the evolution?
So
there?
no change over time.
No change over time.
Yeah.
And when people talk about the missing link, they usually are thinking man and monkeys. But there are missing links between almost every branch of life on the whole tree of life.
Right.
And they're just, the transitional fossils aren't there. There's always some examples. You know, the evolutionists have always and consistently had a few examples, but their average lifespan of the examples, maybe 5 or 10 years before it's rejected.
Sure. Yeah.
So the ones they're talking about today, they weren't talking about 20 years ago. And those they weren't talking
I've heard
about.
Somebody say once that whatever evidence is proposed to you for maybe transitional fossils or something of that nature, put that evidence in a box, sit on it for like 5 years, pull it back out, see if it still holds weight.
I might have told you that.
Yeah, you might have. So one of the things that really helped me when you asked when I asked you that question about the similarities between chimp and human DNA, if God is the designer, we talked about the cell structure. If God is the creator designer, he's going to use common traits in his design.
Any designer of anything humans have ever made.
Right. So I'm a car guy. I love cars.
I was going to bring up cars, yeah.
If I see a VW Bug driving down the road and I see some round taillights on it and I see a Porsche pass that VW Bug and it has the same kind of taillights, it's because the engineers, they engineer both models of car. The engineers use similar traits and similar things in the engineering of those two cars.
There's a lot more similarities between those cars than people even realize.
Right.
The same designer for both. Sure. Initially, back in the day.
Sure. And that's because they're using a good design feature.
Yeah.
In two different products.
There's another way to spin that also. Not only would you expect a designer to do variations on a theme as he's making this and making that and making that, you flip it around, some animals and some things in life are more similar to others. So if we looked at, what's more similar to humans, a rutabaga or a chimpanzee?
The chimp.
Well, chimpanzee. So why would you expect the chimpanzee to be different than us on the inside?
Right.
They should be more similar to us genetically, biochemically, than an elephant or an oak tree.
Yeah. It's not evolution. It just makes sense.
Yeah. So both sides explain the same data. They both explain the similarities. So the similarity of design is not proof of evolution because it also fits creation. They both accept the same thing.
Sure.
So if you want to get to the question, you got to get outside of the area of overlap. And that's hard to do sometimes.
Right. But here's the deal. You have to, or a person has to, be open to that evidence or the facts that and that's one thing too. Sometimes people get mixed up because they say, well, I've got evidence, but maybe evidence is being misinterpreted as facts because we all have facts.
Yeah. Facts and evidence aren't quite the same thing.
Right.
A fact is just a series of things that are true,
right.
You hope. And then you build up a case and use that as evidence for or against
your position or your starting point.
Yeah. So
would you agree with me that most people, if they get angry when they ask that question, what's the evidence for God? Are they open or closed to the evidence for God at that point?
They usually ask that question because they don't think they can be challenged.
Right.
They think, I've got this answer and I've got it all nailed down. I'm going to ask it in such a way to put this other person on the back foot.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened to me when somebody brought the information to me. I got mad at a very good friend that said there is evidence for God, but I was not willing to look at the evidence for God. So we got to be willing to look at both sides.
Maybe someday you should do an episode just on your backstory.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Fascinating, your background and what you went through before Christ finally grabbed you.
I wanted to share just a quick scripture when we're talking about
I got one too.
The designer God. So let me get my phone up here. Phones are great when they work. So Hebrews 3:4 says, every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. That really helped me. Like when you look at complexity of life, there's a creator, but that creator is the God of the Bible.
Yeah, that's a great facts and evidence verse also.
Yep.
I mean, the facts is that the house exists.
Yeah.
But put it all together, that is evidence for God.
Yeah, because it couldn't come about by itself.
Yeah, it cannot come about by itself. How about this one? In Romans 1:20, for his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Bam! In your face. That's talking about us.
Yeah.
I mean, the information is staring us in the face. The facts are there. The evidence is there. It's just the person who's not there yet with God, they've got to change the way they're thinking and change what their expectations are.
Or at least be open-minded.
Or at least be open-minded. Yeah.
That's it.
Let yourself be challenged on this issue, because in the end, the arrows are pointing at God.
Yep. All right. Well, this was a great time. And it's exciting to know that we do have evidence. If you're interested, there's an awesome article on creation.com. It's written by Paul Price, and it's called A Detective's Approach. And I don't know if you remember the old show Columbo, but he was like this crackpot investigator. And the article kind of goes through, using Columbo's perspective, what would you expect to find on a crime scene for evidence? So what would you expect to find for evidence for God? Read it in that kind of context. That's on creation.com. If you like this and you want more, go ahead and subscribe, but don't forget to click the bell, because if you click the bell, then you're going to get new content as soon as it's available. So thanks for joining us.